Hi, welcome to Pyrography Made Easy. I'm Brenda. In this tutorial episode, I'm going to explain how to create this baby's face. This is the second installment in my portrait tutorial series. Like before, I will cover everything needed to create the artwork. We'll start with transferring the photo and finish with signing it. So let's get burning. Let's analyze the reference photo. The light is on the left side, so the shadows are on the right. The right side of the face is mostly in shadows. The eyebrows are pale in color and barely noticeable. Both eyes have an arching, segmented highlight on the left side of the iris. To the left of the right eye is a dark shadow, and below it is a rounded or domed shape. Below that is a dark shadow around the nostril. The bottom of the nose is shadowed, but there is a very thin line of reflected light along the outer edge. The left laugh line is shadowed on both sides of it. The shadow on the cheek gets gradually lighter the further from the laugh line you are. The shadow to the right of the laugh line is a cast shadow, so it is more uniform in color. The right laugh line is shadowed on the left side, but the right side is receiving light. With the mouth, we see it is open in a smile, and there isn't much of the upper lip that is visible. Below the lip is a dark shadow, and there are 2 teeth visible. The tongue has gradient shading and a touch of a highlight on the left side. Then there are 4 more visible teeth. There are either spit bubbles or metallic fillings along the left side of the gum, and I will be ignoring them. Next we have the lower lip, which has shadowed sides, followed by a highlight along the outer edge. The center of the lower lip is more uniform in color. There is a shadow below the lip and a slight crease on the right, with a highlight to the right of that. The bottom of the chin is shadowed, but it also has a very thin line of reflected light along the outer edge. The double chin is similar, but the shadow is slightly darker. Below that is a cast shadow on the neck, and it is darker than the other 2 shadows. Print the image onto standard copier paper and coat the back with graphite. I recommend using a pencil that is HB or darker. Any brand will work. Do not use charcoal as it will smear and smudge. The layer of graphite does not need to be perfectly uniform, but make sure that there are not any gaps in the coverage. Secure the image to the paper or board using a minimum of 2 pieces of tape. Since I am burning on paper, I used a low-tack paper tape as it won't damage the paper when it's removed. This image shows the damage that regular tape, like Scotch tape, can do to paper. Use a combination of solid and dashed lines to trace over the face. Use solid lines on areas that have hard or crisp edges, like the iris and the teeth. Use dashed lines along the edges of shadows. The dashed lines represent transitions where the color or tan hue changes, getting lighter or darker in value. Now normally I would be using a mechanical pencil for the tracing, but the pencil lines can be hard to see. If you look closely, you can see them. To make it easier for you to see what I am doing, I am using a red pen and I'm just drawing over the pencil lines I already did. If burning on paper, do not exert a lot of pressure onto the pen or pencil while tracing the image, as you can emboss the lines or create grooves into the paper. Embossed lines or grooves will remain white when burned over. Check the trace lines for missing spots before removing the image. If there are any missing spots, drop the image and trace over the missing areas. Once the trace lines are good, remove the image and place it nearby. Do one last check for missing spots. Also, darken up any trace lines if needed. Again, use a light pressure when doing this. Once you are done, you will have a bunch of random shapes created by the dashed lines. We will burn in the shapes individually using a process called constant comparison. Then we will erase the pencil marks and smooth or blend out the transitions between the shapes. Let's talk about a good setup. First off, have your reference photo nearby. Do not use the photo you traced from. If you are right-handed, put the photo to the left of the workstation. Keep a piece of scrap paper nearby to test out the pen tip on. If you are burning on wood, keep a piece of scrap wood nearby. Now I have secured the paper to a scratch board by ampersand. This is to keep the paper from warping. You can use thick cardboard or plywood for this. The paper was secured to the board using white artist tape as it is acid-free. Let's talk about constant comparison. Constant comparison means that you pick a shape created by the dashed lines. I will be using the one below the eye, and it has a green circle around it. For discussion purposes, we will call this shape A. Then, find that same area on the reference photo. We will call the reference photo shape B. Now, critically examine shape B. First, compare it with the adjoining shapes. With how I did my trace lines, I have 3 adjoining shapes. One is above shape B. I didn't put dashed lines at the end of it. 2 is below and to the left of shape B. And 3 is below and on the right of shape B. Comparing shape B with shapes 1, 2, and 3, it is easy to tell that shape B is much darker in color. So shape B would get burned to a dark tan color that gets gradually lighter on the left side. Now compare the tonal values between shapes 1, 2, and 3. 3 is the lightest colored shape to me, so I would make it a pale tan color. Shapes 1 and 2 look very similar, at least to me, and so those would become medium tan in color. Now use these values as you work on adjacent shapes. For example, compare the crease on the lower eyelid with the 4 shapes. To me, it closely matches the color of the darkest area on shape B. Now what about the bright spot touching the crease? Well, that seems closer in color to shape 3. Now look at the eyelid and compare its tonal value with our known shapes. The eyelid is darker than even shape B, so I would burn this to a light brown color. What about the shadow on the cheek? Compare it to our previous shapes. To me, the shadow starts out similar in color to shape B, and it ends closer in color to the eyelid. When you start burning in the shapes on the face, make sure you replicate your observations from the reference photo. So the color for shape A should match shape B on the reference photo. As you burn in more shapes, constantly compare the tonal values of the shapes to make sure that they match the reference photo. Also, use the values of the shapes you have burned in as your guideline for future shapes. For example, we previously determined that the value for the first shape, shape A, is the same value as the eyelid crease and the beginning of the cheek shadow. So as you burn in the eye crease and the cheek shadow, constantly compare your burn value with that of shape A to make sure that they match. Hopefully, I have explained constant comparison well enough that you understand what I mean by it. Let's start with the right eye. Use the razor edge of a shader to burn in the solid lines. Then, color in the shadowed area on the temple to the right of the eye using the flat of the shader. I am using a combination of circular motion and uniform strokes to do this. If you are unfamiliar with my terminology, I have a video that explains them. I will put a link to that video in the description below. Next, burn over the upper eyelid and then work on the shadow to the left of the eye. Our goal is to burn in areas just to the point where the pencil marks are no longer needed. I am using an eraser by Tombow, but any pencil eraser will work. I like to work in small sections at a time, so I burn in areas, then erase the pencil marks, and move on to another area. As I said in the image transfer section, the dashed lines represent transitions where the color changes value. We do not want hard, crisp lines along those transitions, so it is important to use the flat of the shader. At this point, we are just blocking in areas between the dashed lines. Once the pencil lines are gone, we will reburn over the areas to get them to their final value and smooth out the transitions. As you block in areas, make sure to keep the areas in tonal balance with the reference photo. By that, I mean look at the reference photo before burning in an area and decide if it is a dark, medium, or light colored shadow. Then burn in the area to match that observation. For example, this spot on the eyelid is a light or pale shadow. To either side of that area, it gets a few shades darker. Along the sides of the face are medium to dark shadows. When you burn in these areas, replicate that. Again, the colors do not need to be their final value right now. Instead, they just need to be in tonal balance so that when the pencil marks are gone, you can still tell where the different colored shadows are at. Once the pencil lines are not needed in an area, erase them. The pencil marks interfere with our ability to judge the tonal value in the area. Now that the pencil lines in the area around the eye are gone, let's finish up the eye. We will start by getting the area around the eye darkened up and the transition smoothed out. Plus, we will be burning in any unburned areas around the eye. As you are working, make sure to consult the reference photo often. Make sure you are keeping tonal balance. Another way of thinking of this is being in a state of constant comparison. This means you are constantly comparing the tonal values between the areas and comparing your art with the reference photo. To help you do this, ask yourself questions like the following. Where is the lightest area? Where is the darkest area? How does the spot you are burning in compare with the adjoining areas? Is it the same color? Is it lighter or darker? If so, how much lighter or darker? Is it slightly different, so it's only a shade or two darker or lighter? Or is it a lot different? By asking yourself these kind of questions, you begin to look at things more analytically, and this helps you replicate the photo better. The white of the eye is in shadows, so it needs to be darkened up. Then reburn over the eyelashes, but don't make them too dark. Switch to a writer pen tip. Make sure to test the tip on scrap paper, adjusting the heat setting as needed until the desired burn result is achieved. Burn around the edges of the iris and the reflected light on the iris. Afterwards, burn in the pupil. Next, darken up the base of the eyelashes and the other areas around the eye that need further defining. Consult with the reference photo frequently. I removed the numerous pauses from the video where I stopped burning because I'm consulting with the reference photo. At this early stage in the artwork, I am pausing almost as much as I am burning. Reburn around the light reflection on the iris, and then burn in the shadow underneath the eyelashes on the iris. Afterwards, burn in the iris of the eye. I switched to a larger writer pen tip for this. Watching this video, I discovered I made a mistake with the eye. I burned a really dark, thick band or border along the edge of the iris. This is not on the reference photo, so don't replicate what I did. To create the texture that is found on the iris, burn some thin lines that radiate outward from the pupil. Vary the color and length of the lines. Always do a burn darkness check on scrap paper or wood each time you switch pen tips. Adjust the setting on your burner until the desired burn result is achieved. For me, that desired result is a burn that is medium to dark tan in color. Above the pale eyebrow is a little patch of highlighted skin that matches the color of the eyelid highlight. Keep that in mind as you resume working on the skin around the eye. Now let's work on the nose. Use the flat of the shader and burn the dark shadow found next to the right nostril. As you work your way around the contours of the nostril, use the front edge of the shader to burn a crisp or hard edge along the bottom of the nostril. Then extend the color outward or away from the nostril using circular motion to ensure a soft edge on the shadow. Right now, our goal is to burn around the trace lines to the point where they are no longer needed. Once the pencil lines are gone, then we will fine-tune the area. As you work on the face, try real hard not to view the face as a face. Instead, concentrate on the small shapes made by the trace lines. With each shape, look at the reference photo and determine how dark that shape should be. Compare the total value of the shape with nearby shapes. Is the shape lighter or darker? And if it is lighter or darker, how much difference is there? When you burn in the shape, replicate what you observed from the reference photo. It doesn't need to be perfect at this stage, but you need to be able to identify the shapes for comparison purposes once the pencil marks are gone. Another thing to keep in mind is that most of the shapes created by the dashed lines do not have clearly defined edges. When burning in the shapes, use the flat of the shader to help ensure the edges remain soft. Once the pencil lines are gone, we will smooth out the transitions between the shapes, and that process will be a lot easier if the shapes do not have hard, crisp edges to them. I am using a combination of circular motion and uniform strokes to burn in the shapes. Also, I am using the flat of the shader. I only use the edge of the shader when working along areas that have clearly defined edges. A couple of examples of that would be the dark opening on the nostril, the outer edge of the face, around the iris edges, things like that. Finish burning in the small shapes on the nose, paying close attention to the shadows and the intensity or darkness of the shadows. For example, the light is coming from the left side, so the right nostril is more shadowed than the left one. Use the razor edge of the shader to burn a thin line just under the upper lip. Then use the flat of the shader and burn the upper lip to a medium tan color. Looking at the reference photo, we see a shadow along the left side of the mouth. There is a slight shadow between the nose and the lips, and this shadow gets darker along the right side. Burn along the edges of the shapes in this area. Once that is done, erase the pencil marks and start to blend out the transitions by burning along the edges to extend and fade the color. Rotate the board and burn along the lower edge of the lip so that it is a dark tan color. Now finish burning the upper lip to a dark tan color that is slightly lighter at the top of it. Then finish burning in the shadows along the right side. Since the area is pretty smooth and mostly uniform in color, I am using uniform strokes as my burn method. Burn in the rest of the upper right side of the head. This area is fairly uniform in color, so once again I am using uniform strokes to burn it in. Rotate the board and burn along the inner edge of the ear. The ear is considerably darker than the face, plus it is slightly out of focus in the reference photo. I am choosing to ignore that, and I am giving the ear crisper or more defined edges. Rotate the board so that the pen tip is in optimal position and burn along the outer edge of the ear. Then fine-tune the shadows and the overall color on the ear. There is reflected light along the right edge of the face next to the ear. When you burn in this area, make sure to burn it a couple shades lighter than the rest of the face in the area. The techniques for the left side of the face is no different than the right. We will burn in the shapes created by the dashed lines. Once the pencil marks for the dashed lines aren't needed, then erase those pencil marks. Afterwards, smooth out the transitions between the shapes, or burn in more shapes so that more pencil marks can be removed. Always use the flat of the shader pen tip when burning unless you are working around an object that has clearly defined edges, like the iris or an eyelid crease. The left side of the face is receiving more direct light, so it is more illuminated or brighter in appearance than the right side. This means that the shadows aren't as dark. As you burn in the left side, do not try to make it look like the right. Instead, replicate what the reference photo is showing you. I use constant comparison to do this, and I have mentioned that term several times now. Plus, there is an in-depth explanation that starts at the 7-minute, 3-second mark if you want to review that. Basically, constant comparison means you burn in a shape based on your observations of the reference photo. Before you start the next shape, you compare it with the one or ones that are already burned in. You are comparing the tonal value or darkness level of the shape with others to determine what color or darkness level to burn in the new shape. Switch to a writer pen tip and burn in the pupil. Then burn along the edges of the iris. I have to burn mine dark to match the mistake I made with the right eye, so don't imitate that. Next, reburn over the eyelashes. Start the burn stroke at the base of an eyelash and pull it outward to the end. Lift up quickly at the end to get a tapered fine point at the end of the eyelash. Now switch to a shader pen tip and burn in the iris. Work carefully around the reflected light areas of the iris. Rotate the board as needed when working along the bottom edge of the iris so that your pen tip is in optimal position as you burn. As you work, keep in mind that the top of the iris, just under the eyelashes, is darker than the bottom. You probably noticed that I've reburned over the iris a couple of times to build up the color. This gives the eye more tonal depth. Make sure to burn some thin lines that radiate outward from the pupil. This will mimic the texture found on the iris. Vary the length and darkness level of those lines. If needed, switch to a writer pen tip and touch up the pupil. Also, use the writer pen tip to burn some subtle short lines along the outer edges of the iris. The lines should angle towards the pupil. Then add a touch more texture and color to the top of the iris. Afterwards, finish burning the skin around the eye. Remember to use the flat of the shader so that the edges between each shape stay soft. Don't forget to burn over the whites of the eye. The right side is completely in shadows, and the left side has a shadow along the top of it. If needed, reburn over the nose to darken and fine-tune it. I am reburning the tip or the end of the nose. In retrospect, I realize I should have also darkened up the bridge of the nose. There isn't much of the left ear that is showing, and it is slightly out of focus in the reference photo. I am choosing to make the ear look like it is in focus, and I'm making it slightly darker than the reference photo. Finish up the right cheek. It starts out a medium tan color and quickly changes to a really dark tan or maybe even a light brown color. I am mainly using uniform strokes to burn in the area, but I also use some circular motion, mostly along the edges where the color changes. Circular motion is a great burn stroke to use in areas where you want a seamless transition. Now finish up the left cheek. It has a little more tonal variation. The cheek gets gradually darker as you near the jaw, plus there is the area next to the laugh line that is pretty dark. There is also a little hint of a dimple and a slight reflection just a little ways below that. I used the same burn strokes on this side of the face. Generally speaking, I use uniform strokes to fill in shapes and circular motion to transition between the shapes. As we work our way towards the chin, the color gets darker along the bottom of the cheek. I want to mention that it is very important to blot or tap your pen tip on scrap paper before you start burning on the baby's face. Doing this will prevent accidental, really dark blotches from occurring on your artwork. Under the chin, there is a little fat roll or double chin, and where the two touch is a very defined line that gets gradually lighter along the outer edge of the fat roll. Below that is a cast shadow on the neck. The color gets a little bit lighter, but the right side of the neck is in shadows. Use the edge of the shader just under the edges of both the chin and the fat roll. This will produce very crisp or hard lines in those areas, and that will clearly define the boundaries of the chin and the fat roll. It is a good idea to periodically check your work and see if there are any areas needing to be fine-tuned. I did this, and I'd realized that the right cheek wasn't dark enough, so I'm re-burning over it to fix that problem. I am using the same two burn strokes that I have been using for all of the artwork: circular motion and uniform strokes. With the chin, we see that the left side has more light, so there are shadows along the right. The center of the chin has more variations in color due to the underlying muscles forming a smile. Like we have with the rest of the face, burn in one shape at a time. Consult with the reference photo before you start each new shape. Use the process of constant comparison to determine the darkness level of each shape and to maintain tonal balance. Once the pencil marks are no longer needed, erase them and blend or smooth out the transitions between the shapes. Rotate the board if needed when working along the bottom edge of the double chin. Use the razor edge of the shader and burn a dark brown to black band of color under the upper lip. Carefully avoid the two teeth. Then extend the color outward onto the tongue. The color gets lighter a short distance from the lip. Also, the tongue has a rough or bumpy texture on it, so don't burn the area to a smooth finish. Rotate the board and burn a crisp line along the inside edge of the lower lip. With the way it appears on the screen, this looks like the upper. Along the edges or the corner of the mouth, the line should be much darker than the center. The edges are in shadows, and the center is where the visible gum line is. While the board is rotated, burn around the teeth. Also, burn the outer edge of the lower lip, but only along the corners. Make sure you do not burn the lips to a dark color. Rotate the board back and finish burning in the tongue. Again, don't try to burn the tongue so that it looks super smooth. The paper I am burning on has some texture to it, so I'm allowing that texture to be very visible. Another thing that I am doing is lifting the pen tip often and just holding it there for a mere fraction of a second. This lets the pen tip warm up, and when I tap it to the paper, it produces a slightly darker burn upon first contact. Now don't pause for too long, as you only want a burn that is slightly darker. Make sure to avoid burning over the reflection. I switched to a smaller shader so that it would be easier to burn around the teeth. I get asked a lot why I switch shaders. The answer is that I'm using a shader that best fits the area I am working in. Shaders can all do the same basic things. The main difference is the size of the burn stroke it produces. Right now, we are getting the mouth blocked in. After the pencil marks are gone, we will fine-tune the mouth, adjusting tonal values and adding details. Darken up the area of the tongue by the two top teeth. This area is pretty dark, but the color gets gradually lighter towards the tip of the tongue. If needed, re-burn over the upper lip to darken it up just a little. Then, finish up the dark area on the tongue. Darken up the right corner of the mouth. The gap or the area between the tongue and the lips should be burned to a very dark brown or black color. As you work, evaluate the skin around the mouth and fix any problems you see. The right side of the lower lip is in shadows. The color fades considerably near the center of the lip. The left side of the lip is also in shadows, but the shadows are not as dark as the right side. Continue to burn in the lip and fine-tune the surrounding area. I did a bit of erasing on the left side of the lip. I will talk about that in the erasing section of this video, but I wanted to explain where that white spot suddenly appeared from. If you are having problems deciding what hue of tan to burn the shapes in your portrait to, I recommend using a tonal value finder tool. With the tool, you can use the gray value side to check against the reference photo. Once you have a match or a value that is closest, then use the sepia side and burn the area to match what the sepia side is showing. I have a video that explains how to make your own, or you can go to my website and print one. Keep in mind that depending on your printer, you might not get the same values as you would as making one. As you work on the tip of the tongue, be careful around the teeth. Also, make sure to lightly burn over the teeth, especially along the sides where the shadows are a touch darker. Notice how the far right tooth is in shadows, so it is darker in value than the other teeth. If needed, switch to a writer pen tip and burn around the teeth to ensure that the edges are clearly defined. Then, apply a layer of tiny dots over the tongue. The dots add texture and should be subtle in color, so don't burn them really dark. Keep them within a shade or two of the tongue color. Afterwards, switch back to the shader and do any fine-tuning if needed. I darkened up the end of the tongue, and I also reburned over most of the chin to darken it up. Once you are happy with your artwork, then it is time to sign off on it. I like to sign and date the art with a graphite pencil. Then I use a writer pen tip and burn over the pencil marks. Afterwards, I erase over the area to remove any residual graphite. This method of signing is how I sign all of my art regardless of the medium. The last thing I want to talk about is fixing mistakes on the paper and the paper in general. First, let's talk about fixing mistakes. I used the flat edge of a sharp knife to scrape over areas that got too dark. This worked, but use caution as it is very easy to abrade the paper surface, making it very rough. I also tried using an ink pen eraser. I didn't really care for that because it really abraded the paper, made it very rough feeling, and when you burned over it, it made it very blotchy looking. I think I got better results with the scraping. The paper is 140-pound, hot-pressed, 100% cotton watercolor paper by Lana Querelle, and I'm sure I pronounced the name wrong. I did not like this paper. It had a bit of a texture to the surface, which made the art look blotchy. Attempts at fixing mistakes made the paper texture even worse, so I don't recommend using this paper. Well, that's it for this tutorial. I hope I provided you with clear, easy instructions to follow along with that will help you with your own artwork. On my website, Pyrography Made Easy, I have the written version of this tutorial along with the reference photo that I used, so feel free to check that out anytime. Well, thank you so much for watching my video, and I will see you next week.